Yeah, so I expect grief bots to be one of the big applications of social AI. As you mentioned, it's relatively niche at the moment. And I think a lot of companies are very scared to go anywhere near this, but I can see that changing quite rapidly. So just for context here, it's worth noting that chatbots fine-tuned on real-world individuals. There's a lot of evidence that suggests they can be really accurate in terms of capturing the kinds of things that people would say, the kind of modes of conversation, and so on. So one famous experiment was the DigiDan study. This was using GPT-3, so a really primitive language model by modern standards. But a group of people, including David Schritzgable, Anna Strasser, Matt Crosby, and others, basically fine-tuned GPT-3 on the works of Daniel Dennett, and then got I'm sure most of your audience know Daniel Dennett, one of the greatest philosophers. He died a couple of years ago. This was shortly before his death, though, they did this. And then they got Dan's friends and colleagues to pose questions to both Dan himself and the DigiDan bot, and they generated 4 responses from the chatbot, and they had Dan's response there as well. Users, Dan's friends and colleagues, were pretty much close to baseline, close to bare chance at telling which responses were from Dan versus the chatbot. So this is just to emphasize that I think appropriately fine-tuned chatbots could do a really good job of simulating the kind of things that a person would say in response to a given query. So let's just imagine that you do have this category of grief bots that can provide an accurate simulacrum of somewhat of a deceased person. Well, I mean, the risk of, spicy take, I can see lots of really positive use cases for this, right? So I've actually even said to Anna Strasser, one of the people who did the DigiDan study, that, if I get hit by a car tomorrow, I've discussed this with my wife as well, then, she should absolutely has my permission to fine tune a bot on me. And,
Hmm.
my wife will give her perhaps lightly edited or curated set of my correspondence, my social media presence, and so on. So that then, my kids can talk to this simulacrum of me if they choose to. I can imagine there being real value, if my son or daughter is like 17 and considering, should I go to law school or medical school? I wonder what my dad would have thought of this,
Hmm.
right? That seems like a
Yeah.
really potentially positive use case. So I think grief bots are a really interesting area. And there's interestingly some studies looking at people's use of grief bots for therapeutic purposes, right? Like if there are conversations you always wanted to have but didn't get the opportunity to have, perhaps because a spouse or parent died suddenly. This could, one phrase that's used is offer a soft landing for the grief experience.
Hmm.
So I think there's loads of really interesting positive use cases there. But equally, as you say, it's an absolute minefield.
Yeah.
And I think to a lot of people, that the whole idea of grief bots just feels like something from a Black. Well, literally, there was a Black Mirror episode about this, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I think that raises some fascinating questions about, how that changes the nature of the grieving process, how it changes our very concepts of mortality